Good afternoon, everyone. Zach Schloss, Director of UX Strategy. Oftentimes, UX is later on down the pike. So my team gets the unique advantage of being upstream, working with a lot of the fine folks that you've talked with today, thinking big picture about things like innovation and transformation. And then we sort of meet in the middle with all of our design and implementation friends. So this particular topic is really unique because being in the middle of all that chaos sometimes can present a unique challenge. Today I'm going to talk specifically, surprise, about design strategy. But a lot of the themes that were set up earlier in the day really do pay off here. We heard early on from both Schloss and cultivate that chaos is human and the solution to chaos is human. I think being in the UX role, we're often charged with representing the human, the end user, and being their voice at the table. So I'm definitely in agreement. We're going to see a couple different ways that the human kind of comes through, navigating some of that chaos today. But to start, a fact to get us all motivated. We understand that a lot is changing right now. Technology, business, culture, and it kind of has our CEO friends sweating a little bit, which hopefully will unlock some budgets. But unfortunately, it seems like a lot of that anxiety right now has everyone grasping for the easy button. So what is the Gen AI product we can purchase off the shelf, plug it in, that will solve all of our problems? I'm here to argue today that it's going to be a little more complicated than that. In order for us to focus on the human and really solve those challenges, we're going to have to go through some processes. And we heard a bit about that earlier. Jessica set up nicely some of the different ways that we introduce constraints into the equation. As happens with facts, HBR swung into action. They immediately were sort of responding to, okay, what happens if in a decade every business really has to transform 180, 360 from where it is today? Wow, that means we have to think really bold. We can no longer just sort of incrementally get our way there. And most leaders are going to be in the position of asking themselves, probably some people in this room, is my strategy bold enough? And I really do think that design strategy has a unique role to play in helping to think about the world of possibilities. Some of the themes we've also heard today: psychological trust, environments where transparency and debate exist. As Ben Magnuson pointed out, having sort of this objective and cross-disciplinary data. So all the parts and pieces are starting to come together. It's my job to bring it home. Thinking like a design strategist, in my view, will really help us meet that bold moment that we're all kind of facing down right now. Of course, change is nothing new. I think similarly to the concept of chaos, change is a uniquely human experience. It's something that I think we're only going to navigate out of by thinking about the other people that are involved in this process and making sure that they're included. The future is somewhat known and somewhat unknown. I think there are elements that change a little slower. I think about living in New York, and the subway system does not go anywhere quickly. There's lots of problems that need solving. But things like the little device in your pocket moves at lightning speed. So how do we navigate when there are so many different sort of points along the way? Design strategists really have no choice but to embrace chaos when they're meeting with their technological counterparts, their business counterparts, and they're sort of helping to chart this path forward. The ways that we get there are to think non-linearly. We already heard a little bit about that today. And to sort of plan for continual change. It's never going to stop, unfortunately. But there is an answer. We're getting there. I feel like design is this unique tool that really does help us navigate that changing chaos. It helps inspire. It helps us imagine a future that doesn't exist today. Think about any home project that somebody might have taken on. The first thing you do is get excited about all the possibilities. You're imagining a future that doesn't exist right now, but might soon be here. Designers who are working on enterprise level software bring a similar level of excitement about the future that could be. Design also helps us create that change. So it's a process. It helps us follow some steps and patterns to get to the desired outcome and the change that we want to see. Design also helps us respond to change. So think about the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a lot of design happening really quickly in order for us to respond to that moment. We had to jump into action and find new ways to live our lives. Finally, design helps us advocate for change. So anytime that we are proposing something new and we're wanting to get some dollars to make it happen, we're putting together a nice design presentation. We're taking it in front of people with the money, and we're saying something like this. This is where we want to go. And in that way, it helps to convince others that they want to be on that journey with us. So right there, we're already seeing really quickly how design is sort of in a unique position to help us navigate change. But it goes a little deeper than that. I think everyone in this room has been either part of or adjacent to a design process, and they realize design is more than just the finished product, right? We have these beautiful things, nice colors. At its heart, it helps us all sort of manage and deal with change. I still imagine I was helping, I'm kind of dating my mom here, but I was helping her download Uber for the first time this weekend. And she wasn't quite clear about what all was going to have to happen. And yet she had taken an Uber before with me. It's important to remember that everyone's going to be navigate change at different times. Some of the ways that Kat was imploring us to think about empathy, everyone's little journey line is a little bit different. In a similar way, everyone's path through change in a business context will be too. So I just set up a really lofty statement in terms of the role that design plays. How does it do all of this? Kind of returning back to the human. So if you think about any sort of major purchase that you might have made, let's say a car, you've probably taken a series of steps that look something like this. You've done your research, probably gone online, looked around. You might have gone out and talked to friends or family, gotten their opinions. You might have compared some models and some data, and then finally maybe taken it for a test drive. What most people don't realize is that is very similar to what the design process is. It is a human nature sort of process of sort of gathering information, weighing pros and cons, trying things on for size, figuring out what might work. My team and a lot of the teams at One North use these 4 tools often to help us navigate that sort of human problem of change, especially when we're looking at a design challenge. So these tools are probably not totally new to anyone here, but it's interesting when you sort of put them together and navigate a consistent cycle continuously, they add up to a solution that helps us navigate change using design. So our car buying reference here, going out and doing some research, looking at the data, gathering up other people's opinions, taking it for a test drive, very similar in that way. What's at the heart of all of these tools is that they work best when we have empathy built into them. So again, going back to Kat's points, if we pull in all the empathy from our customers, our employees, other people who are a part of change, and plug them in to this process, suddenly we start to see the magic happen. So I'm going to go through each of them in a little bit of detail. Taking a look at a couple different industries today, we're going to start with fashion. A great example of an industry that has to constantly stay ahead of the change and has sort of operationalized research being a key part of the way they operate. So each season or sub-season, I'm sure there are many, they're constantly having to produce new products that are innovative and helping to help their consumers imagine future selves. And by putting on those products, they are sort of living their best life. The only way that they're going to succeed in this exercise is by having a lot of diverse perspectives. They can't just go look at one segment of the population and say, okay, that's the trend. They have to look across a broad spectrum. But when they bring all that information back, they're able to sort of really think about, okay, critically, where do we want to go next? I'd like to argue that nearly every industry should be doing this. And it may not be just enough to sort of go purchase the latest Gartner report. There probably is research that's unique to each individual organization they should be taking a look at as well. I'm going to walk through a couple healthcare examples today. I thought this is an industry that nearly everyone has had experience with, but it's also an industry that continues to evolve rapidly. I got my start working in UX around the time Obamacare came to be, and consumer-driven healthcare was blowing up, and all of a sudden, everything you knew about health insurance changed. And for better or worse, we are where we are today. It is continuing to evolve. We went through the pandemic, and suddenly appointments were virtual, and that was never really happening before. Well, that trend is continuing, and now all of a sudden, it's looking like the future is more of a virtual experience, and there are going to be so many people who've never done that before. Maybe they've never been on a FaceTime or Zoom call in their life, and suddenly they're being sort of required to show up in this way. It's very similar to what we went through over the pandemic, where a bunch of school children suddenly had to access online learning, and we discovered, oh wait, not everyone has broadband access universally. So there's going to be a lot of systematic learnings, there's going to be cultural learnings, but the point is, it's not just going to be a one and done, like, okay, we went and talked to some people, we learned best practices for virtual appointments. It's going to be a consistent evolution over the course of time, and we're going to have to bring that information back continually. So what do we do with all that information once we've gathered it up? The second piece of this puzzle is really to triangulate that data. So we gathered up some information about the users of this particular product or service. We've identified there's sort of opportunity within our business base to go pursue it, and maybe a segment of the market is ready to adopt it. So we're doing good. But we sort of had this constant change spiraling in the middle. Any one of these data points could skew over time, and then suddenly we're going to have to revisit it. I think it's also important to know that by only looking maybe at any one piece of data, I think Ben made this point really elegantly throughout many examples, we're going to risk seeing patterns that don't really exist. So if we just go say, well, the millennial segment is all in on virtual care, and then we just assume everyone else is on board, we're probably going to miss an opportunity. Another important piece of that triangulation, and Kat made this point really well, is we can't just look at the end user. As a user experience professional, we're more often than not now starting to pull in more of a 360 view when it comes to the users. So the healthcare professionals themselves are the ones that are along for this ride. What happens if some of the aspects of the way they're used to delivering care change? What happens if it affects or impacts business outcomes or healthcare outcomes? What if just the pure learning curve of new technology systems is too much for these folks to handle? Any one aspect of this could actually disrupt success of this type of a program. So it's important to remember that whenever we go out and try and learn and bring back information to help us inform decision making, we need to consider more than just our end users, but also the folks who are helping us operate that product and solution. In some cases, we don't have the data. So this is definitely unique to sort of the innovation space. Whenever we're looking at something that doesn't exist today, sometimes design has to help us go gather up information. So we're doing some initial brainstorming, maybe based on some hunches. Maybe we don't quite have a full picture. We're prototyping some different ideas. We're putting that in front of people and getting feedback. Our peers over at IDEO do this really well. Imagine actually walking through an experience to understand what that might be like. If you're sort of role playing, it's a much more cost-effective way of understanding whether or not this might work. I think it's also important to remember that almost all the data we have is backwards facing. So as we start to think about navigating the chaos of the future, it's going to be important to sort of get creative with different ways that we're gathering up data. And qualitative data is definitely at the heart of any sort of design or experience design work that we do. The third piece of this is co-creation. So the last example actually brought that to the forefront. We're going to need other people to help us do this job. Designers do not have all the answers, but we're sort of facilitators and leaders in that way. I think Jessica made this point really well. Whenever you're facing high degree of ambiguity or sort of an uncertain future, you kind of need a strong leader to step in and help navigate that process. I think design strategists are kind of uniquely positioned in this way. I've seen it work hundreds of times, and it's really interesting when ideas start getting generated. Suddenly you're like, oh, they were there all along. We just needed someone to sort of help pull them out. I think designers have a unique ability to sort of break down barriers and not be so worried about the politics. My team is often asking tough questions of executives just as they are of end users. And by breaking down some of those walls, we're able to get sort of more real data to really bring back to the table. So that curious collaboration is key. But once we have all that information available, we are able to free associate and say, okay, this idea over here and this idea over here, maybe those two work really well together. We're able to use the power of a group, maybe end users, other parts of our business or operations, other experts, to come together and make the best version, or potentially create multiple versions so we can go try a few of them out. I think for our future of healthcare example, this is going to be key. This particular product, I've known several people who have it and wear it, and it's interesting that it's now just part of their everyday. And before they had a whole other process of managing their health. It's interesting that it's also so simple and easy to use for someone to quickly scan and check their blood sugar and understand how they can better manage their health. Whenever we make something that helps someone feel more in control and that it's just so easy to do that it's sort of second nature and they don't have to think about it, I think we know that we're winning in terms of making the right connections for solutions. So I think this is a good example, and I wasn't in the room when this was designed, but it's a good example of sort of the right level of people being involved, understanding the needs of patients, understanding the needs of healthcare practitioners who have to coach their patients on how to use this, and then likely are going to be on the receiving end of, oh, I have this data I'd like you to take a look at. It has to be that simple for trust to be able to be built. For someone to say, I'm now willing to put technology literally into my body and trust that it's going to work for me and help me with this issue that I have to deal with. The more complex that our problems become, the more that the future continues to change, we're going to have to bring this approach to the table. It's not, again, just simple enough for a designer to think of a pretty wearable or a fun interface to use, but something that, in this case, really is sort of life-saving technology. The fourth way that we navigate change often is through experiments. And we've heard a version of this. Kalev highlighted our adaptive strategy earlier. The more ideas we can generate, the more times that we can go out and test multiple options. Yes, many of them will fail, and we have to be comfortable with that. But the likelihood that we're going to end up discovering something that is really right and does solve our problem increases. Again, a great example of this was the COVID-19 vaccine. Not exactly a design process, more of a scientific one, but I do think the design process borrows a lot from the scientific method. They didn't just go all in on one vaccine and say, okay, we're done. They started with hundreds and then through trial and error learned along the way. Not every business is going to take on all the options, right? There's going to be a market for any given product or solution. There's going to be many different people all participating in part of this. But it is a process that's designed to learn. So along the way, we know that we're going to gather up more information and eventually get somewhere that is more successful. Lastly, it helps reduce the costs of getting it wrong. Although there's a larger investment up front to explore more options, on the tail end, we're not going to end up with something that oh shoot, as Jen just mentioned, 24 months in, people hate it. Now we had to go, reinvent the wheel. Kalev also made this point really well. There are many examples of companies who embrace learning from failure. And I wouldn't say that all of these are just complete failures, but they were explorations that they ended up realizing, oh, well, this isn't our core product, or at least not for now. Or we are in tough competition in one of these markets, or users just aren't quite ready for this, and that's okay. So obviously experiments are huge within the healthcare industry. We can point to lots of examples when it comes to pharmaceuticals and medical devices, but some of the ways that healthcare is facilitated and delivered, I think we'll probably have additional scrutiny, and we're gonna have additional learnings as we go. And this is where sort of all the pieces start to come together. We're continually using the research and data we've gathered, we're bringing everyone into the table, and we're sort of repeating this process again and again to really try and get it right. So this connects to a couple of the themes we've heard today. Trying to be certain in the face of chaos is likely going to lead to places that either aren't going to solve our problems or lead us down the wrong path or lead us towards something that might be wrong. Instead, trying multiple things, taking small steps, is a more certain way of actually navigating that uncertainty. So what does all this mean? I promised a bit of a solution that designers can lean on when it comes to helping organizations be bold and navigate that chaos and change. I think it looks something like this, and I'm not the first person to put this into action, but it's a continuous process. It doesn't just happen once, and it feeds on itself. So in order for us to really navigate that constant change that we're facing, we need a continuous design strategy. And it needs to be kind of a scientific process in problem solving. The key to this, though, is it really requires space and time for it to thrive. And I feel like oftentimes, again, with the anxious CEO who is just trying to find the AI solution that's going to work, this can feel challenging to sell when we're trying to ask for the permission to get it right. I think this is where design uses data and asks for some permission to help lead the way and point back to other successful examples where design-led innovation really does end up in solutions that not only meet the need in the moment of the business, but meet the needs of our users and lead to success. So we'll wrap it up here with our fearless design strategists. What are some of the qualities that they most often have to sort of meet these moments? They embrace change. I think it's so exciting to talk to any designer about why they do what they do. They like to step up to the table with some new challenge that they get to help tackle. If you think about all the other people maybe in an organization that don't sort of wear a design hat, oftentimes they see change as really scary or threatening or stressful. I think that's why designers are kind of uniquely positioned. They facilitate multidisciplinary collaboration. They show up saying, I don't have all the answers. But they know that by bringing people together, they can help get there. They lead through that ambiguity. It is in their nature. The design process is a little bit messy. They don't know what the end result is going to be, but they help us get there. They stay flexible along the way. They embrace improvisation, another tie back from this morning. They're comfortable being wrong and learning new information. They actually seek it out. They want diverse perspectives. And then finally, they tell stories. They humanize it. So any great design presentation will always walk you through a scenario that's based around a real person and their needs. And I think for all these reasons, combined with our continuous loop, this type of thinking, which doesn't just have to be someone with a designer title, by the way, will help us navigate that change in a way that feels more grounded and leads to better outcomes. So I'm proposing the design strategy through its people, process, and supporters are really critical to business survival in the face of change. That's it.
Thank you, Zach. I'm going to pick on our healthcare folks here. Mark and Hill are talking about how impressive this was related to healthcare right now. I could just see. Busted. All right, so Mark, I'm going to pick on you then. I mean, I think chaos and change in healthcare and being on the marketing strategy side, it seems like it's a hard thing to change a healthcare industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually interesting how quickly people adapted when the pandemic happened and we didn't have a choice. And the number of virtual visits went from, a select few to 80% of all the outpatient activity that was happening within 3 months. And it happened because, the constraints that were spoken to earlier, right? There were these extreme constraints that were put on how we had to operate to serve our patients, and we responded. And so, and it's also interesting, like, there's been a lot of talk, and like upstarts in the healthcare space that have tried to break in, and it's really difficult. Some of them have been backing out. So I think it's an interesting space to try to be in, and it is very dynamic.
Wow. And I'm going to also piggyback on one of Zach's things because I overheard the United team we were talking earlier. The idea of the user research, and then we talked about diversity a couple times today. It's not necessarily about the diversity of your teams and thoughts and ideas, but the diversity of your research. I was talking about on the flight out, now you can connect your Bluetooth device into the screenbacks and such. And I was asked, I'm like, I'm really still a hardline person. And the point was, there's probably elderly that don't know how to use Bluetooth, or there's lower socioeconomic people that don't afford Bluetooth devices either. Like, a lot of times research or who we're designing for, we focus on the ideal employee, the ideal customer, and we forget about that diversification of research too.
Well, and tie back to my talk last year, a little plug. The team that works on those projects also needs to be representative of that diversity. So whether it's through the team themselves or the research that they're doing, absolutely. I would say that fits well into our continuous loop concept, that it's not just a one and done. It's probably great for a certain majority to have that Bluetooth. I actually tried it on my way out and it wasn't working for me, but probably user error. I would say that that's where we start to get into a cycle of how can we make sort of the best entertainment experience in flight. And there's probably multiple ways that occurs, right? You bring your own device, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that to me would lead to multiple solutions, as well as maybe trying to hone in on whether or not Bluetooth is.
There's not always one perfect solution.
True. It always depends.
Questions, comments? No? All right. Oh, no.
Sorry.
Phil Donahue coming down the aisle.
I'm not sure if I'm ready to articulate this, but way back at the beginning of time, I was in the fashion industry, and one of the really most important things I learned, and this goes to Ben's talk about, just I've been able to apply the different things I've done in my career to current, but was the designers in that industry, or at least in the company I was at, were encouraged to just go out there and be bold, find the trends, don't pay attention to the research, don't look at the sales results, go out there and bring something back that's going to delight people in a way that they never knew that it's going to be something they never even imagined they'd want. And then the user experience people or the merchandise planners or whatever would balance that, whatever that beautiful design was, with what we knew would sell in each market. But we still put that lime green miniskirt in every store, but in some places in Minnesota we only put 2, and we put 20 in Miami. But that was because you wanted people to be delighted by that gorgeous design that they never thought they would need, be brought in the store even if they were never going to wear it. So how do you balance that? How do you create that like just open space? Maybe that's chaos for
I think it's
new ideas without, and then temper it, I guess, you know.
I think in that first step, it is sort of the openness to there are no bad ideas, and we can bring back a wealth of things that are, you know, diverse perspectives, and it's probably where then we start to chart out, you know, what's maybe more of a bold pick versus a safe pick, and you know, probably put some of our money into the safe picks, but put a few dollars into the bold picks and see what happens. I think Kalev was really articulating this too, with sort of diversifying your strategies, so not just any one. But I think, you know, that's what fashion has always done really well, is that it excites us and it gets us inspired. And yeah, I might buy the lime green thing and then buy 4 blue things. You got 5 sales. That's pretty great. I think we need to take similar approaches to any sort of product or solution.
Kalev and Jen?
Hey, Nancy. I just wanted to address it because Zach and I actually have talked about this, but the way that I articulate it is that, and this is like a nuance between like Jen's talk and what he's talking about, which is I think our path out of it is we try to position the research as inspiration, not a constraint, right? You should be drawing your inspiration from what you know about the people. And that what you know about the people shouldn't be a simple fact or a data point. You should be asking why. You know, like you should always know why is the case, right? Like why is this number this way, that sort of thing. So I think that's part of the key about maintaining enough creative freedom is like you ask your designers to pay attention to the research, but that in and of itself isn't the kind of constraint that Jessica's talking about, right? And that's the way I think that we frame it up to avoid that kind of collision.
Jen, were you going to say something too?
Nancy might remember this because she was at this event, but many moons ago we did an event when we were a different company called the Innovation Forum, and we had the chief scientist from Amazon who created the predictive buying model. And it was interesting to hear him speak. I mean, he had come up with something that was so revolutionary, and he said, you know what, though? What you miss from it is that unexpected item that you never knew that you needed. Or like when a friend tells you, you have to listen to this, you have to read this book, or you have to listen to this music, or you would never find it if you just followed the path that he had created. And it's sort of the sadness from him that he'd created this amazing tool, but there was like missing those moments of delight when you sort of get this unexpected thing that's, you know, doesn't fit your persona, and yet still you like it. So that I've been thinking about that all day long with all this conversation about like the tension between, you know, humanity and artificial intelligence and where the two fit. But it was really interesting to hear him talk about that.
Oh, thank you. Eugen? John over here? Or Neil?
Hi. I think that's a very important part to address one, that if you are based on your research, every answer is based on what happened before other people's opinion, you're creating exactly same experience in someone. If you want to try to create a new one, you have to try something that is not proven, not data-driven, not someone else says so. So I think at fashion side, there is a more of freedom of you gotta try something new because it's very competitive. Because everybody has the same research, everybody same has those things. I think that more and more our industry with the technology being used, I do believe that's the case, that everybody has the same set of table stake. Everybody has free shipping, everybody has technologies. So I feel like that's the more and more places that how do we use researches and these things to create a free space for people to explore and designers and creative to explore. And that's what I actually looking for more of answers and or how we do that in an organization everybody's don't want to take a risk because of it's investment and it's time and resource issues. So that's always my biggest question. How do we create a little bit of a space support?
I think literally just thinking about your question and kind of following the loop in my head, I think we, create some smaller loops. We seek out the lime green that we were unexpected by, and we test it, we try it.
Experimentation.
And it was a smaller part of our budget, and it might fail. That was the other point, right? Like some of these things are going to fail, but that's the only way we're going to learn. And oh wait, the lime green sold. Maybe we should be a little bolder with color. Maybe next time color we'll go all in or whatever. So I think you're right. We need to be embracing more expansive research that isn't just, again, purchasing the latest report. And then embracing that sort of design thinking process, which ends up in sort of the flowering of so many ideas that we should probably have more ideas than we know what to do with.
Neil, do you have something over here? We got two. Chris first, and then Hal.
Hey Zach, thanks for your talk. I loved it, man. Fellow UX designer over here, so a lot resonated with me. Something that really stood out to me was when you spoke about titles, and you were like, yeah, anyone can, you don't have to have a designer title. My immediate reaction was like, oh no.
Don't tell them that.
No, but you're right. You're right. And I think that I had to check myself, and I was like, well, is that really the case? I think the reason I reacted that way is I feel like oftentimes we'll get into situations with partners, whether it's product or engineering or whoever, stakeholder doesn't even have a technology background, and there are strong opinions, and the thought is that like, well, I have a strong opinion, I believe in that, and this is going to be the thing. I don't need a designer to figure that out. And I think that that's where I get concerned, where it's like, no, but you're not going through the process that you beautifully laid out in this presentation, the thought process of how you get from A to B. And I just think that that's, because I do want to celebrate other people taking on the responsibility of this process, because it shouldn't just be a designer doing this. Like the more that we all kind of collectively think this way, the better our products are going to be, and hopefully fewer CEOs think that their companies are going to fail in 10 years. Like it's so. Anyways, I don't know where I was going with that, but I just love the idea of like UX thinking proliferating how we go about doing our business, and not leaning on one role versus another to carry out that process, and more so, sure, we can help facilitate, but the more that we think that way, I think the better. So anyways, thanks for your share.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I keep going back to the CEO who's trigger happy on buying the latest Gen AI product. We should be selling Gen AI. I feel like we'd be making millions. They're so eager for that easy button. And I'm sure the sales guy, no offense, is saying all the right things, right? But until you run that test in your market, in your product, in your business, in your industry, you're not going to know. So some of this too is the many Google examples there, being okay with it not working out. It's like, okay, CEO, sure, we'll put 10 million into this and we'll see how it works. So I think design sometimes can be a little bit comfortable letting go of the wheel and running with it. I know that's really challenging for us. So
I'm going to go last one before we switch. Hill?
Sure, thanks. So this is actually a broader question for all of you guys. On your deck, you presented something about solving for the right problem. And then I saw it in, I think it's Jessica's deck, right? So that a lot of times we're trying to figure out what is the right problem we're solving for. It really depends on the opinion and who you're talking to. An executive that considers one problem that needs to be solved. You talk to a tech person, no, this is the problem that needs to solve. Like, how do you guys come to consensus? Like, what is actually the right problem that we need to solve? For UX, yes, we can do little steps and try things out, but there's certain projects that you all have to get consensus before you solve the right problem. So how do you land on solving the right problem?
I think that's where you need a really strong business partner who's able to like model Okay, what happens if we follow this path or this path or this path? I think I mentioned a couple times there, you won't have that certainty, right? It doesn't exist. But in that case, I would say, okay, let's prototype 4 things and like go talk to some people and see what they say. And then we'll learn a little bit about each of the 4. There are ways even for business models and really high level kind of business strategy to be tested in really low fidelity ways. So I don't think anything is too big to kind of run through that process a little bit, but then there's always going to be a leap of faith, right? Probably someone who gets paid more than I do to think about some of those business strategies, but yeah, I think the same process can be applied.
I'm gonna just kind of and one on that, and as we wrap up Zach's talk. Representing the sales side of things, I talk with a lot of you and others that are out there, and I come back to the Zachs and the Colivs and the Jessicas and the Jens and everybody of the world, and my team does, our team does. And usually if we say, hey, I just talked to Hill and he would, he's interested in X, Y, and Z, the first thing that Zach asked me is, what is Hill trying to solve for? Or like, what is the problem or what is the issue? And that's inherently what we're trying to get to, and you're trying to make that as clear as possible, but a lot of times it can be large and ambiguous, and then you do need to maybe think about workshops, discovery, ideation, things that can maybe help put some guardrails or constraints, as we've talked about, on what that problem is.
What it looks like a lot, and I'm kind of looking at Kat, is we discover so many things that we could solve for. Then it's about where do we want to start.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Zach.